Life can be really hard at times, and just this week, I've been reminded of this more than once when I've heard about illnesses and losses and griefs, so much suffering. And life has a way of happening such that circumstances can really impact our moments and cause us to turn our attention and our focus on the here and now versus the eternal. And we're drawn into the physical realities versus the spiritual realities. Uncertainties, challenges, griefs, sufferings, all of these can cause us to reevaluate our perspectives and to lose sight of what God might be working out in light of his eternal kingdom. In today's homework, we looked back into Exodus to consider a time when God's chosen people had just made and worshipped a golden idol while their leader Moses was up on the mountain meeting with God in order to receive his law. How do things unfold?
Well, God was angry with their idolatry and said that while he would send an angel ahead of them into the promised land, he wouldn't go with them. And he'd give them their physical promise, but he wouldn't be a part of it. The spiritual component of that promise would be missing.
And Moses, he responds to God by saying, you know, we're your people. These are your chosen people, God. So the only thing that distinguishes them from the rest of the world is your presence with them. So if you're not going to go with us, we'll no longer be identified as your people.
So God's presence itself defines God's people. And what did God do with Moses' response to him?
Well, he was pleased, and he poured out his favor on Moses and said that actually, yes, he would go with them into the promised land.
And knowing that he had God's favor, Moses takes this opportunity to ask for something big. And he asks for his heart's desire, and his heart's desire is to see God's glory. So in Exodus 33:18, he says to God, please show me your glory.
So what does all of this mean in light of our John study?
Well, in John 14, verse 8, Philip actually asks a question that echoes Moses' words. He says, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us.
And in verses 9 to 11, Jesus responds by saying, have I been with you so long that you don't know me? Surely you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Anyone who knows me, he knows the Father, because the Father lives in me.
So again, we see this in the Gospel of John and in chapter 14, that Jesus says he is one with God. They are equal. He is God in the flesh, incarnate.
In John 17:26, it reads, I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. So Jesus says his purpose is to make God known to the world.
So according to verses 10 through 12 of chapter 14, it's through his words and through his works, which are actually the Father's.
And John 1:14 and then 16 to 18 says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known.
So Jesus came in the flesh to physically show God to us, not what he looks like, but rather his character, who God is and how he behaves.
And so the people of Israel, they had seen God's character in the law that was given through Moses. They had seen that he is holy and he is merciful and he is just by allowing the price of sin to be paid by a substitute rather than the people themselves. And this was the first grace.
And now in more grace, Jesus comes in the flesh, living out the truth of who God is, healing the sick, welcoming the outcasts, raising the dead. It's grace upon grace. Jesus is speaking the words of God and living out the character of God.
Words and works. Jesus challenges the disciples to look at what all the signs have been pointing to.
And our homework shows that Jesus is pointing to a deeper meaning because Jesus glorifies the Father and the Father glorifies the Son in himself. And Jesus will also glorify the Father in us too.
And we saw in our homework that when Moses was presented with the opportunity for greater glory for himself, he wouldn't even consider taking any away from God. Instead, Moses embraced the more difficult path because that was the path on which God would be the most glorified.
At the beginning of our homework, we considered John 14:6, where Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Here we see that Jesus is the way and God the Father is the destination.
Yeah, so if we're more interested in what's in it for us than we are in being in the Father's presence, then we'll easily trade his glory for our own. And we're going to be seduced into thinking that this is the better choice. We've made the better trade, and we're going to celebrate the easy path. We're going to be seduced into lifting up physical successes and being happy with what we perceive as answered prayer, even if the end result is that we are no closer to the one that we have been praying to.
Yeah, we need to pray, thy will be done. But saying these words is easier than living them, especially when times can be hard and painful and confusing.
Impossibly difficult and not at all doable. We can't pray like this, believe like this, behave like this, or even desire any of this on our own. And we hope that you'll join us tomorrow as we continue discussing those things. But as we close today and consider the prayer, thy will be done, even as our hearts might be troubled, may we follow the example of Jesus, the one whose heart was greatly troubled on his way to the cross. But he still prayed, thy will. John 14:1-3 says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." See you tomorrow.
Bye.